Hello and welcome to Property TV, and this is the second in our series of programmes, Property Gets Political. I'm Stephen Galpin, and with me today is property developer John Howard. Welcome, John.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for having me back after the last series.
Right, well, I thought that went very well. We got through some good subject matter there.
We did.
So let's start off today with how the government are looking at planning and what effect it's having on our property market. Now, the government have blamed developers over the last couple of years for, shall we say, hoarding land, which then contributes to the housing shortage. I'm not so sure that's right, are you?
No, I think the government, I don't think that's really right, and I think the government are hugely frustrated with the local authorities. Basically, a few years ago, they gave the local authorities a 5-year target to reach of so many houses within a 5-year period. And most of them now say they have their 5-year target. But of course that 5-year target is going to have to go up because it's nowhere near enough to sustain what the government are trying to do, trying to get up to 300,000 houses built a year. The difficulty the councils have got is that although they might have, say they need to build 5,000 houses over the next 5 years, they might have granted planning permission for 5,000 houses, they might have done. But they have to prove that those houses are going to be built within a period of time. And if they can't prove that, what's happening is when the inspectorate comes down on an appeal and says, well, if you haven't got your 5-year supply, then I'm going to grant permission because you haven't got it, basically. And that's what's happening. So 1 minute they've got a 5-year supply, 1 minute they haven't, then they have. It's very difficult. And of course that 5-year supply, the amount of houses in future will go up because it needs to go up.
But John, you know, just watching the TV news programmes over the last years, we used to see Cameron put on his hard hat and his high-vis jacket and go out and say, we're going to build so many houses, yes. And now we see Boris doing the same. I wonder if our viewers have the same problem that I do. I just wonder, who do they mean is going to build these houses?
Well, what they're trying to do, as we said in the last episode, they're trying to get small developers like myself and others like us to build up from the 7% we build at the moment in the UK a year back to 15%, 20%. I said in the 1970s it was 70% small builders did. Now the big builders are doing 70%. So that's what they're trying to do, and they're trying to get rid of a lot of the red tape in planning. The problem is, if you are a local MP and suddenly you're told by the government that 3,000 houses have got to be built in a certain area within a period of time, and you want to get in at the next election, you've got a problem. So what's happening? The white paper's come out which says they're going to streamline planning, they're going to do this, they're going to do that, they're going to force planning through. But of course it's a white paper. So it's up for discussion, and what happens is all the local MPs to those areas are going, crikey, we don't want that happening, and they resist it. So then they go to Robert Jenrick, who's the Homes and Communities Minister, and by the way,
the 11th one.
Well, no, he's the minister. He's the Secretary of State, I should say. So he's been in his job a little while. And Robert, I've met Robert a couple of occasions. He's a nice man. He's taken a lot of stick recently over certain things, which I don't actually think are his fault. But I can't go into any more than that. But I know they're not his fault. But he's had to take the rap for them. You know, they go to see him and they'll go, well, I can't support this. And then there's another negotiation takes place. The one thing they will all support is the policy on brownfield sites. So when you have a building that is knocked down and it's what's considered a brownfield site, and on that, what they're saying is you can automatically build a property up to a certain height on it. Well, of course, to be honest with you, you're pushing an open door with the planners on those anyway. So, you know, most planners, if it's a brownfield site, it's had something on it before, or you're knocking a building down to build another one, they're not going to resist that anyway, probably. So actually, that's a bit of a red herring, that one. So I don't think a lot of this white paper ultimately is going to change too much, sadly, because at the end of the day, the local planning authority and the local planning committee, which is made up of people who've got no clue about planning whatsoever, and all have got an axe to grind if it's in their area, are going to try and resist it.
Well, I begs two questions, doesn't it? Have we now moved past the state where we want 10 or 12 local councillors with very limited knowledge actually dictating our planning policy?
We certainly do not want them anymore.
I think that
things
has
have
to
moved
go.
on. Things have moved on, and I think it should be done at a higher level. So it's done at borough council level normally. I think it should be done at county council level at least. And if not, I know the Secretary of State's got the power to call it in himself and grant permission. But that can now be challenged as well. So it is a real dog's dinner, to be honest
But then
with you.
we also need to look, don't we, at this business of brownfield sites, converting offices back to residential.
PD, permissive development, yes.
Is it a good idea?
Well, the nickname for permissive developments is slums of the future. And the reason for that is that the outside of these buildings remains, on the whole, they remain looking like an office block. And of course, if they're in a semi-commercial area or commercial area, you might get planning, you might get the certificate within 56 days to do your scheme, but you still got to wonder whether you want to do it, because if you can't sell the units at the end, or you can't finance them because the banks say, well, it's in a very commercial area, I don't think they'll sell or I don't think they'll rent, then should you be doing it anyway?
Well, there's a very practical difficulty as well, and that is that in these brownfield sites or in the concentrated office areas, there's very little infrastructure for normal living. There's very few shops, very few schools,
Absolutely. And the PD for officers, the only two things they can really turn you down on is if you haven't got enough cycle storage and you haven't got enough waste bins. Now they sound, oh, well, that's okay. But you can get into difficulty, because if you've only got an office building and no external space, you've got to try and fit in the bins internally and the bike stores, and that isn't easy. And I know councils that have turned down the PD on those two things.
I don't think we'll get into the bike store.
Well, basically, some councils want 2 per flat, some accept 1 per flat. So be careful out there. It's not as simple as you think.
I think if you're in London and you talk to the taxi drivers about cycles, they'll say, there's hundreds of suits wobbling about the city, causing mayhem.
When I was at Cambridge United, we got planning on the stadium, on a new stand at the stadium, and the council insisted we had 550 bike spaces. So it's just bonkers. I know it's Cambridge, but even so, it's bonkers. I think the most that got used was 25 in a game. Per game. It's ridiculous.
Okay. So look, we've just looked at some of the hiccups that you can get with office conversion. High streets. We're now starting to talk about converting our high streets to again residential. And I suppose that's the other extreme of the problem, isn't it? That all the facilities there, the shops and everything else, but gradually, if it turns into a residential area, you're going to lose the balance, which I do know through interviewing a number of town planners and people who are involved in city refurbishment. The level of thought about what goes onto a high street is quite high.
I don't know who you think's thinking about that, Stephen. I don't see. I've seen some absolute disasters. I'm not sure I agree with that. It's very interesting. I mean, the whole of the high street thing is changing.
I can tell you, in the London boroughs, for instance, you won't be allowed to have any more than so many fast food takeaways. No, I can understand.
I can understand that. So originally, lots of properties in the town centres were houses. They then, in the 1900s and beyond, got converted to shops. They then were asked to be put back into houses in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s by developers, investors, and the councils have resisted because they say, oh no, we know why they resisted, rates, commercial rates, nothing else, and they resisted them going back. Well, if they hadn't resisted all those going back, we wouldn't be in the mess we're in now, or not so much of a mess. So George Freeman, who's an MP in Norfolk, contacted me recently and said, John, would you like to help the market towns to replan some of the market towns and change the planning from commercial to residential and so on, and I'm going to get a grant off the government to help do so. So I said, great, I'll be delighted to spearhead Suffolk. So that's what I'm doing.
Well, that sounds like a good plan, rather than just an ad hoc sort of conversion over on permitted development.
So we're looking at a more overall So we take a market town and we're looking at as more overall scheme how we can assist and support and give grants to developers and owner occupiers to change from commercial probably to residential. And I think these town centres are going to be more residential with some shops.
I think that's probably a good idea.
Thank you.
Let's hope so. All right, thank you for that, John. This is Property Gets Political. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me after the break. Hello and welcome back to Property Gets Political with my special guest, John Howard. Welcome back, John.
Thank you.
Okay, before the break we were talking about the various intricacies of the planning system that we've got here. Do you really see much changing over the next year?
I have to say the new PD rules that have come out from the 1st of September are nowhere near as simple as the office conversion ones to residential. So on the new ones, it says you can increase a detached purpose-built block of flats by 2 floors. It says you can put an extra floor on a detached bungalow, but it also says there's a whole list of things the council can object to, and one of them is the way it looks. Another one is the overlooking. So actually, if the council want to turn you down, I mean, I've got 2 or 3
really
detached blocks of purpose-built flats. I'm going, great. And I spoke to my planning consultant. He said, don't get too excited, John, because they can turn you down on this, and this. And I'm thinking, so he said, what are the chances? I said, not a lot, which is a shame. So he's listened to the planning authorities, and actually is watered down. I mean, well, not watered down, he's watered up, if you like, because the office one is very simple, 56 days. They can't object to it, apart from the 2 things we mentioned earlier. And now, the new PD from the 1st of September, there's loads of things they can object to. So,
but John, I mean, just talking politically here, it seems to me that this government is hell-bent on making everything suitable for being run by government in Westminster. Now, whether that's the pandemic, whether it's planning, they want to seem to have absolute control over everything. But we're starting to learn from the pandemic that actually some of the local authorities are far better equipped to deal with matters in their own town. Isn't that not the case with planning too?
That's a very good point, because actually the difference between Conservative and Labour is that Conservatives want to deregulise everything and let local people make local decisions, normally.
But do they?
Well, normally that's what Conservative is about. Whereas the Labour want it all done centrally, Big Brother controlling the population. And actually, almost this is now, during the pandemic, it's been reversed. And at last, Boris and his crew are listening to the local authorities. Of course, some are Conservative and some are Labour. The Labour ones can never agree, Liverpool for instance, they can never agree with Boris on any point going forward, because they will be lynched by their voters in Liverpool, because there's no way ever that a Conservative could get in central Liverpool. Not a million years. So when Boris said the other week or the other day, very cleverly, oh well, the Mayor of Liverpool I'm delighted he's agreed and supported us. Of course, the next thing is you hear from the Mayor of Liverpool saying, oh, I haven't done any of the sort, because they cannot be seen, Stephen, to agree with each other. You know, the Labour Mayor could never be seen, or the Manchester one, to agree with the Conservatives.
But you have a succession of ministers coming out saying, oh, we've been communicating with these local authority leaders and all the rest of it. And the local authority leaders are coming back and saying, well, when was that then?
Yeah, and that's because even if they have done so, they can't publicly state they are, because they cannot agree, they cannot be seen to be agreeing with the Tory government.
All right, well, let's now move on to a subject which is very pertinent for a lot of our viewers, and that's rent.
Yes.
Both commercial and private rent. Now, we've had a situation where the government has said in the last couple of years they want to encourage private renting because it does help towards solving the housing situation. Yes. But I want to put to you a scenario which I think is a huge problem. And it's this. So let's take a young couple who rent. Let's say that they have a fairly stable but unexciting career in front of them, because some of these jobs, like perhaps being a nurse or being, you know, in public service, they're not huge opportunistic careers. They're very stable, very consistent, but probably have got very little potential for huge growth, either in terms of promotions or salaries. So they
very
rent.
important jobs.
Yeah, very important. So they rent. And with the two of them, they can probably just about afford the commercial rent. Then child number one comes along, so the lady has to perhaps take a little bit more time off work before she can put the child into childcare or whatever else. But they can get over that struggle, but they go on. They can't earn enough to save over and above the rent they're paying, so the chances of them buying are pretty slim. Now, let's say that just moves on through their life. They're happy, they're renting, they're paying their rent, everybody's happy. That's great. Until they reach 65, and on current money, I think, what are they on? 700 a month pension. Okay? How are they going to pay their rent, commercial rent, on 700 quid a month pension?
Well, I'm hoping they vote Tory, and they're a bit more ambitious than that, and they want to get on the housing ladder, not just for them, but for their future family. And hopefully,
well, I agree with you, John.
They may well have done. They also may have been left money by then by a family member who has passed away.
I think that's a very optimistic view.
However, if that doesn't happen, in this country, the subsidies that are available, if you can't pay your own rent, are immense, more than probably any other country in the world nearly. So I don't think that's a very valid argument you've made.
I think there'd be a lot of people
this
using
government,
food banks and having trouble.
I think this government, has, if you've both been working and paying into a pension, I think one way or the other you'll be okay. It probably wasn't the best thing to do not to manage to get a house. If you're both working, you could probably somehow get one. And by the way, don't forget the government are desperate for you to buy a property. We know why, because people that buy a property are aspirational and they normally vote Tory. So I understand there's some people fall between the gaps. I understand that, but on the whole, I don't think that's a very valid argument. I would say what more is a valid argument is the fact that going forward, I have a nasty feeling that this government are going to say short old tenancies are no longer short old tenancies, and that you can only get a tenant out if you want to occupy the property yourself, and you have to be able to prove you can.
Which will crash the buy-to-let market.
Which will crash the buy-to-let market. But then the buy-to-let market have had it very good for an awful long time. Very low interest rates. Section 25's come along, rightly so in my opinion, and I've taken a load of stick for that. Some of your viewers have disagreed with me, I know. But the point is that so many people, or quite a few people, have been taken advantage. They haven't been paying the capital gains tax when they've sold a property at a profit as a second home, and they haven't been declaring the rent as rent either. So what the government have done, they've said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to try and force people down the road of having a limited company. So it's regulated with annual returns. I don't think that's wrong with that. You pay your tax, I pay my tax, and why shouldn't people pay tax? The more tax that isn't paid just means the ones that do pay, and we both pay enough tax, and lots of other viewers watching this programme are doing so too. And that isn't right. And I think the government have done a good thing there. I know I'm unpopular by saying it, but I'm not here to be popular. I'm here to give my opinion and my facts, and that's what I'm paid to do.
Which is what you do very well.
Thank you.
Now, just for the last few minutes of the show, let's just talk about commercial rents. Our high streets have been, in the main, governed by a lot of the big institutional landlords.
Yes.
And those days with big household name stores going bust seem to be coming to an end. Now, there's been a lot of talk. Some of these big companies are switching over their tenants to what they call turnover rents.
Yes, they are.
And I'm not too sure about that, because I think turnover rents are just full of potential arguments.
Totally.
Full of difficulty. What do you think?
Well, funnily enough, people don't think I do a lot of commercial because I bang on about residential so much, but I've just actually let 2 or 3 commercial units at the Wine Rack, which is a good effort in this market, really. But one of the tenants decided that they'd like to look at turnover, and I said, I don't even understand how that works. So I said, I'm not doing that. And actually, they've agreed to do a traditional lease. I've also just last year bought an old department store and I got PD upstairs as residential, and I've now sold it on. But the tenant at the time was paying 115,000 downstairs. The lease was coming to an end, and I estimated that 115,000 would end up on a new lease, if they would stay, 65,000. So any rent you've got in the high street, on the whole, I would halve to be safe. And actually, they took it on at 65,000. I've sold the development on to someone else, and guess what? They've gone into liquidation.
I think the problem is that unrealistic rents now are just out of the question. They're no longer going to be sustained.
It's not
and
sustainable.
We're going to have to take a view on it, and unfortunately, it's those with pension funds that are probably going to suffer, because a lot of the big property companies are big contributors to that
Well,
income.
you know, Stephen, that over the years, the only people that could touch high street property were the pension funds, and they were buying these they were buying on yields of 3-4%, and blue chip tenants. Do you remember that word, blue chip tenants? Is there such a thing now, apart from Apple and 1 or 2 others, the banks maybe, but that's about it. There's no one blue chip anymore, and you're absolutely right, all these insurance companies and so on are going to be left with property they've got valued on rental yield of 3 or 4%. The rent's going to be halved. And even then, they're probably an 8% yield now, not a 4%. So they are in for a big haircut, as we call it.
Okay, well, on that pessimistic note,
thank you.
That's all we've got time for in this show. So thank you for watching Property Gets Political. Big thank you to my guest, John Howard.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you, John. And we hope to see you again on Property TV. I'm Stephen Galpin. Look forward to that.